In this analysis video, we're going to take a look at the swing of Jason Day. Now, Jason Day has been #1 in the world before. He's one of the elite golfers of the last 5 years. In this video, we're going to talk about what he does to dominate so well off the tee and why he's such a good wedge player. And we'll also talk about one thing that he does with his body and one thing that he does with his wrists that will help you immensely if you can put them into your full swing. So for starters, let's talk about the one thing he does with his body that makes him such a consistent driver and wedge player. And for these two really high quality clips, I want to thank Michael Field. He's got a great YouTube channel and he said I could use them. Definitely go over and check out some of his other videos. He's got some really good high quality slow motion, looks like it's off a tripod, couple really good camera angles here. So here we have Jason from the same exact day using driver and then a wedge. And the thing that we're going to key in on is Jason is the king of the anti-stall. And what I mean by that is many golfers struggle with kind of their body stopping at impact and having lots of hand action and wrist release down at the bottom. What we'll see with Jason is that through impact and into the follow-through, you'll see the club head, the hands, and the torso tend to rotate almost at about the same rate. So one little image that I'll draw for my students is if you look at the relationship of these three segments. When it comes to driving the ball, the later you can have the club catch up with your chest, usually the better. So you'll see when we take Jason through, it's not until he gets to about here, we can see the angle of the club out that way. I'll move this a little bit more. We can see the angle of the club out that way pretty much in line with his chest. So between impact and that follow-through position right in there, his chest was still leading his arms and hands. Now he does a great job of getting some good ulnar deviation, which we'll talk about next, and he maintains that connection of the relationship between the hands, the club head, and the chest for well into the follow-through. And you'll see that it's not until he has the club up to about here that he really uses his wrists to absorb the speed of the club. When many golfers struggle with a chicken wing, it's that the club is passing their chest by way of what the wrists are doing down here at the bottom. So if you imagine that Jason froze his chest right there and the club just started passing like this, well, something would have to absorb the speed. The wrist by itself wouldn't have enough capability, so he would bend the elbow, shrug the shoulder, and have a little bit more of a classic amateurish finish. But because of the relationship and how Jason has squared the club face, he's able to keep the chest ahead of the club for a long period of time. That's a trademark that you'll see with a lot of good drivers of the golf ball, and that's also a trademark that you'll see with a lot of good wedge players. Now the difference is you can see that timing-wise, that club is pretty much in front of his chest right now. So just after impact, it's not waiting all the way until shaft parallel. But he's going to maintain the relationship of that chest arm hand connection because he's using his core and his body to move his arms in the club more so than he's using his wrists. For someone who has some of the best hands and is consistently up in the elite category as far as strokes gained around the greens, you'll see that he does very little with those hands and wrists in his wedge shots. Now let's talk about one more thing that we can highlight from these face-on views. So looking at these two different impact positions, if we're looking at a relationship between, say, the ankle, the hip, and the shoulder, you'll see that there's slightly different alignments. With a good long club swing or a driver swing, you're going to see the body having this tilt away from the target. I call that a bracing position, and it involves using your hips and your core to absorb the speed of the club trying to pull towards the target that way. Typically, good long irons and good drivers of the golf ball are going to have this tilt or axis tilt away from the target. If you see this in your wedge game, you're likely to struggle with fat shots and thin shots, and may even fall into having the yips. Now, on the contrary, with the wedge shot, you'll see a fairly vertical or stacked position on top of the golf ball with more level shoulders and an earlier straightening of the arm. The swing will be more powered by the body more powered by the arms, and the body is getting things in position so that that arm-powered movement makes solid contact. Now, if you look like this with wedge shots, you probably have very good contact. But if you look like this with your driver, you'll typically struggle with a steeper angle of attack and probably hit either low pulls or low push cuts. I think it's important to recognize that while the swings may feel very similar, there are some major key differences in how elite golfers swing the club with the driver and what they do with their wedges. If you're trying to make the exact same swing with all clubs, it's likely that you'll struggle with one end of the bag or the other. Now, from the down the line, we're going to take a look at how Jason blends his steeps and shallows. We can see in early transition that he's got a good contribution of his legs for producing power, but we can also see that he's using a little bit more of an arm pull in getting the club in a more vertical position than a lot of the elite ball strikers. Now, one of the things that appears to be towards the higher end of tour average is you can see that his upper body is working away from the golf ball a fair amount during his downswing. Now, I've found that golfers who have that tendency on their 3D tend to have a hard time hitting half shots and kind of touch shots. And this may be one of the reasons why Jason is known for having one gear and swinging pretty much full at every single full swing. Now, from that steepening position, one of his shallow movements is moving away with the upper body like so, but one of the other big shallow movements that he uses is the unhinging of the wrists, and that's a common one that we'll see in most body-powered swings. Now, what you'll see is from right about here, somewhere around delivery position, you'll see that there's a fair amount of unhinging of the wrists, and the club is working more vertically down the screen than it's working out. So the body rotation will contribute to causing the club to go out that way across the screen, but it's the arms unhinging that bring the club down. So if you tend to see that from about shaft parallel, somewhere right about here, if you tend to see that from here to impact is when you tend to get steep and you tend to struggle with more pulls or diggy contact, then it's likely the unhinging move that you have to practice. I have a few different drills that I like to use to work on it, but it's one of those key moves for creating shallowness down at the bottom of the swing. If we compare that to his wedge shot, you'll see that he has a similar amount of unhinging through here, but we'll see that there's a little less body drive, and as a result, and having less of the axis tilt, which we saw from that face-on view, we'll see that as he gets to impact, he's got a little bit earlier straightening of the arm. He's using more of his arms and his shoulders as his power source, but still getting a pretty good amount of unhinge to help shallow things out. Where over here, you could see that he still has a fair amount of bend in that arm because he's powering it more with his lower body, but he still used that unhinge movement in order to create some more shallowness to his path. So if you want to hit the ball like Jason, work on unhinging of the wrists through the key time during the release, and work on your body continuing to rotate on the way through. It's also important to understand that Jason is not the pinnacle of iron success. He's typically around 100th on tour as far as strokes gained with his approach shots. But he has had a few good years where he's done exceptionally well, but historically he tends to be around 100th. If you tend to get steep with your arm movements in transition, then know that you're going to have to shallow it out somewhere. One of the most common ways is what Jason demonstrates, which is moving the upper body away from the golf ball. If you want to understand your pattern better, then head over to golfsmartacademy.com. There, you'll learn about all the different key movements that build up the stock tour swing. If you're not quite ready to sign up for a free membership, but like how we break down these different movements, then please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you'll be the first to know about it whenever we create new video content or whenever we host our live Q&A sessions.